Up next is Yogi Schulz. Yogi worked with Dave Fisher, and they both started with PPDM back in 1993. So Yogi, I'm going to pass it over to you, and you can go back through some of the early history of PPDM.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate the opportunity to share the story of PPDM from the time that Mel just talked about leading up to the present. I'm assuming you can all see my first slide. So I want to tell you the story of the history of the PPDM Association at Warp Speed. My name is Yogi Schulz. I was a member of the board of directors for a couple of decades from the early days. So I want to express my thanks today, especially to Dave Fisher and Elise Summer for their research and their extensive contribution to developing the presentation that I want to share with you now. So I'm going to use this growing tree as a metaphor in my presentation here today because, as Mel introduced, PPDM originates in a single idea, which has become a giant tree over these 30 years and delivered value to many organizations and advanced the career of many people who've been involved. So here's some ideas for my story outline. We're going to talk about how this tiny seed became planted and then how it blossomed and resulted in a wider vision that eventually created a global forest. Before PPDM, we'll just start with a short time travel into the not so distant past. Some of you are likely too young to remember this era. Before PPDM, the computing and data management environment at many oil and gas producers is best described by these characteristics. And this is a period from the beginning of the use of computers in the oil and gas industry until the end of the 1980s. Computing environments were accurately described by these characteristics: company-operated mainframes, there wasn't any outsourcing, separate applications and databases for wells, seismic, land, and mapping, reliance on in-house custom software development because there weren't any software packages, data management using file systems because databases didn't exist. It was a unique data model was used by each application, and every company created its own data models, and the data sets themselves were quite sparse and didn't have the richness that we enjoy and appreciate today. And then in the late 1980s, again, as Mel mentioned, the oil price collapse, it's still oil price collapses that seems to drive everything, created a push to cut all kinds of costs, including IT costs, and there was a direction to shut down the mainframes. And then everything moved to these emerging information technologies, and they created a pull to adoption. The client-server desktop applications, the Oracle DBMS, distributed databases, software innovators emerged, and they offered software packages for desktop workstations, and that led to the ability to integrate proprietary with public data. And then some people started thinking outside the box. Gulf Canada, represented by Mel, and 3 vendors collaborated to develop a common shared data model. And they had agreed on some basic model design principles, and they made the model open, which in this case means that it's available to anyone and everyone is encouraged to contribute. And these 3 vendors were Finder Graphics, Applied TerraVision, and Digitech Information Systems. And their goal was first to migrate from legacy systems, all the well subsurface data, the seismic locations, and the land data. And then their second goal was to implement desktop applications for wells, seismic lines, land, culture, and mapping. And that led to a seed being planted. So the idea for PPDM is presented at the AAPG convention in 1990, and an article about it was published in the AAPG Geobyte, and several producers adopted the common data model to support richer applications and the migration away from their mainframe. And these are the 8 companies that started in on the very beginning. And the model was distributed to each of these, by each vendor for a simple $100 handling fee and a 3-ring binder. What you received for your $100 was that 3-ring binder and an Oracle script file on a floppy disk. I don't know how many people still remember 3-ring binders or indeed floppy disks, but there you have it. You can see how far we've advanced. And then this is the graphic from the first public presentation about the PPDM vision. Pat Rines, who many of you know, worked for ATS at the time, and he gave a presentation that described the vision for E&P data, improved E&P data management based on this diagram, the integration of data and applications and the computing environment. And then we have the pioneers in the early years who were all involved up to the incorporation. This has all occurred before the incorporation of the PPDM Association. There was a lot of activity. All these people formed a community and contributed their expertise and their time. They created and sold the vision. They provided a business leadership. They produced the required technical innovation. Some of them were SME volunteers who contributed data management and application expertise. They provided Oracle DBMS skills. They understood legacy data migration. They developed new applications, and they coordinated the work of the volunteers. So my point is that a lot of different skills, talents, and people went into those early days, just like we experience today as we further develop the PPDM Association deliverables. And then the roots of the organization grew in February 1991 with the first meeting. And at that time, what was the first time the model was named the Public Petroleum Data Model. And there was an agreement to work toward incorporation. And the budget was the princely sum of $47,000. Excuse me. And the modest membership fee. And the first work groups were started for seismic, well test, land. And then in July 1991, the not-for-profit was organized as PPDM, the Public Petroleum Data Model Association, with 24 initial members. And by the fall, that had doubled. And the first ever meeting of this group of people was held in Houston later in that year. And then the tree blossoms. There was a mission statement, the ongoing implementation and refinement of a standard vendor independent data model, which addresses a broad range of petroleum and E&P business needs. There were work groups, and the first deliverable using the Oracle case tool created PPDM version 3.0, and communications started with the first ever newsletter of the association. And then we have growing pains and capability. Mel became the CEO in this time period, and part of this time period, Mary Kay Manson was the co-CEO, and the first contractors were hired starting in 1991. Ian King and Gord Jensen as DBAs, Floyd Baird for communication, Ian King as a developer and manager of the model, and then Trudy joined this technical staff in 1996. At that time, there were other visions for a data model. Some of you may remember IBM Mercury and the POSC Epicenter initiative. And the PPDM Association tried to collaborate with the POSC organization, and that failed, unfortunately, in early 1995. There were just too many different views about information technology direction, architecture, scope, complexity, and the culture of the two organizations just didn't fit. So the PPDM Association refocused on developing the business-driven model. And what that really means is we're focused on current technology that everyone was using and could use immediately. In contrast to POSC at the time, that we're focused more on where technology might go and what the future might hold. So here we have Ian and Trudy, who were among the leaders at the time and who did a lot of good work then and now. And this is an early schematic of what the data model would look like. The boxes on the left represented the current state and the boxes on the right represented the aspirations of future opportunities. And then beyond that, we reached a wider vision. The participants in the community aspired to a larger vision that included more than simply a data model, although data models were then and continue to be important. The association wanted to build the community and changed its name to reflect that in 2008. We tackled other topics like semantics, and the association experienced then and sometimes experiences today revenue challenges as the aspirations of the members exceed the revenue that's available. The association also branched out into education and professional development. And then and now, the association is highly dependent on work groups, committees, and events to advance the work and build the community. Many of these events were already virtual because of the worldwide distribution of the members, and obviously they're all virtual now. And we've had more and more events to share knowledge and to share understanding. And we've also started to offer training. Now it's called e-learning and webinar training courses. So with the advent of regional leadership teams, there are more events and opportunities for local involvement and participation. You may wonder about how the model grew over time. It grew exponentially through the various versions over many years. And these should make a reference to the various IPDS standards that the association is involved in. The first row shows the various versions of the data model again, and the second row shows the object-related standards that were kicked off in these 3 years and have continued in their work: the business rules, the reference lists, and the object standard. I've also gotten involved in semantics of E&P terms, as you're aware. Well status and classification. What is a well? What is a completion? What is a facility? And well identification. So as you can see from these two slides, the association has evolved well beyond the data model to encompass other standards and professional development that have created value for data managers and the entire upstream E&P industry. Events are an important component as the number of people who are members and the number of work groups and the number of countries that are involved. The number of events has gone up. Only in the last year, due to the pandemic, has the number of events slowed down a little bit. As I mentioned, the PPDM Association has moved into professional development. There's now a body of knowledge that's a part of every IPDS standard. There's education, there's career tools, and the certified petroleum data analysts. And all of this professional development leads to events like this pictured at the right, or this example here in Jakarta, where everyone is just completing a training course. And here's another group completing a training course. So this has increased in terms of number of participants and the number of locales where this work is going on. And then we had this data management conference for the 25th anniversary here in Calgary, and we presented these Pioneer Awards, another major milestone. I don't know if you recognize all these smiling faces, but from left to right, we have Trudy Curtis, our CEO, then Wes Baird, who's been involved, well, all these people have been involved for decades. Arthur Boycu, Pat Rines, myself, Mel Husty, Chuck Smith, Dave Fisher, and on the far right is Trevor Hicks, who was the chairman of our board of directors at the time. And we were able to pay tribute to these long-standing participants in the PPDM journey. So it's been a great story, but it's really today is a milestone in what is and will be a great continuing story. The PPDM Association has barely started. what's happening in the future. We're going to see data volumes grow. We're going to see technology change. We're seeing the digitalization of most organizations, including E&P organizations. There's a continuing need for standards, for best practices, for guidance, and for education. And the PPDM Association is well positioned to continue to provide that for one and all in our industry. So it's been a great opportunity for me to share this story at warm speed with you. I hope you didn't blink. And if you have some questions, I'd be pleased to answer that in the Q&A or later in our mingle time.
Wonderful. Thanks